Welcome, everyone, to our second episode of the Sterling Council's 2025 Summer Learning Series. My name is Laura McNeil, and I'll be your host. Last week, during our first episode with Roland Martinez, he introduced us to the concepts of ADLI and LETC. ADLI stands for Approach, Deployment, Learning, and Integration. It's a technique used to establish, evaluate, and identify opportunities for improving how we work within our organizations. LETC, just as a reminder, stands for Levels, Trends, and Comparisons. Levels, Trends, and Comparisons that are used for monitoring the results of our work, our performance, and for identifying areas that we need to improve. During last week's episode, Roland also provided some examples from the restaurant and the healthcare industries of how ADLI and LETC are used to ensure that we're focusing on the right things. This week, I'm pleased to say that we have Gordon Klein, CEO of Reflect Excellence, LLC, with us today to provide a more detailed view of the approach and the deployment portions of ADLI, along with some of his personal insights. And just like last week's session, we've broken this session into 4 parts as well. The first part is the welcome and the recap that I just did. Then we'll get into new material that this week Gordon will present. I'll be taking notes while Gordon's making his presentation. After Gordon's presentation, I'll provide a summary recap of my notes, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, and you can submit your Q&A through the chat window. At this point, Gordon, if you're ready, I'll turn it over to you to take it away.
Thanks, Laura. I appreciate it, and I hope I am ready. I don't know for sure. We'll find out. Give me just 1 second to make sure I got everything in the right place. I do. All right. Thank you, Laura. This is, I think, the 4th series that the Sterling Council has done, each designed to share concepts that drive people and organizations to excellence. Of the 4 series, this is the most actionable. This is the most meaningful. I participated in the other 3 series, but this one I believe in. I believed in those as well. Don't get me wrong, but this model applies equally to middle school students and CEOs, to families and multi-million-dollar corporations. Last week, when Roland introduced this model on behalf of the Sterling Council, he called it the secret sauce. I call it the 7 words. Secret sauce was appropriate because we are going to keep, as an example throughout the restaurant, an example of a small dine-in restaurant. But for me, Gordon Klein, a member of the board of directors, retired state and local government employee, it's the 7 words, and it's the meaningful 7 words. Throughout the course of the series, each of us will give you some examples of what we're presenting following a restaurant model from start to finish so we can pull that golden thread, but we'll also each give you some examples from our personal experience about how to apply the ADLI and LETC model in your life and in your business. Today, I'm privileged to talk about AD, and next week, Nicole Solomon will introduce learning and integration. Of course, ADLI, which we will say over and over again, stands for Approach, Deployment, Learning, and Integration. And as Laura just said, that is an approach, and to me, a vocabulary and a culture that you use to measure and continue to build performance excellence. If you're continuing to build something, you got to know how you're doing, and using levels, trends, and comparisons, evaluating things the same way consistently every time lets you know if you're doing things well. What's an approach? I'm not going to read everything on the board. An approach is basically how you get things done. It's how an method an organization uses to get its work done. It's how a team organizes work to make sure it gets done. An approach is basically just how you're going to do something. If you're familiar with the plan, do, check, act model, it is the plan of the plan, do, check, act model. So I'm going to give you my definition of approach in a minute, but let me stop here and tell you how it's been transformative in my career. I used to work for government, and I was in charge of the finances and administration for a large department in that government. Some of my coworkers from that time are here in this meeting with us. One of the things that was transformative was using approach, deployment, learning, and integration as a method of A, discussing things with my direct reports, and B, evaluating my direct reports. I was in charge of a roughly $300 million budget. I had a lot of other responsibilities. I didn't do it all myself. I had an employee, Jay, who was my financial manager. So most of managing budgets and preparing budgets was delegated to him. I had 20 years worth of experience when we started working together in the government sector, in specifically that government. And he had a number of years of experience in the private sector with expertise that was a little different from mine. First couple of years as we're working together, we worked together well, but I was communicating to him haphazardly. I was sometimes micromanaging because I have been doing this for a long time, and I was sometimes saying, well, you're the professional, I'm going to let you do it. We worked together well, we produced well, but when we changed our conversation to stop at the beginning of the year and say, how are we going to approach doing this? Our relationship transformed, our productivity transformed, our team dynamic transformed. Stopping and answering any question that begins with how am I going to handle it, and documenting that and making the conversation work around that was transformative and is transformative. My leadership skills went up a level. His performance went up a level. The entire department went up a level. In a restaurant example, restaurants basically can be segregated into front of the house and back of the house and support services. In some of the approaches that are used in the front of the house is how someone greets guests to take the door, when they come in the door. It's the steps that the servers take at the table to make sure that they get your order efficiently and they get it to the back. An approach is having a known, documented, consistently followed way of getting things done. When you walk into the door of a restaurant and a host or hostess is there to greet you, if they know that they need to make eye contact, they need to smile, they need to welcome you in a certain way, whether it is welcome in, welcome to Moe's, or welcome to our restaurant, that they all do it and they all do it consistently. They ask for the reservation if they have a reservation system. They get your name. There's a whole host of things to do that, if it's done consistently and correctly, makes your restaurant experience better and makes the restaurant work more smoothly. Similar with the back of the house. They need approaches for how they prepare meals and follow recipes and keep things clean. And approaches the way they set up their stuff. Mise en place in the restaurant industry is how you lay out everything so that when it's time to do the dance of getting that meal prepared, they have not only the recipe, but they have everything laid out and they have it prepared. That is what approach is. My definition of what an approach is it's the answer to any question that starts with how. How do you greet a customer? You should have a documented and systematic approach. How do you stock your pantry? You should have a documented and systematic approach. I even have an approach to defining an approach. So whenever I am coming up with the answer for a how question, like how do you greet the customer? How do you prepare the budget? How do you ensure that the dishwasher is loaded correctly? The first sentence of the answer always starts with either a trigger or a cadence. When this event happens, when a customer walks in the door, then I do something. Or every night when the restaurant closes, then I do an inventory. Approaches grow in complexity as you go along. So when a customer walks in the door, if I'm already dealing with a customer, then I make eye contact. I signal that I will be right with you. And then I follow my normal approach. And then approaches cascade. They chain. They become part of a system. And a system is how you run a business. Approaches should be documented. I've mentioned this before, and I really do believe it. When you come up with an approach, when you come up with a plan of the Plan, Do, Check, Act, they should be documented. If you think to yourself that everyone knows, you're wrong. We all have assumptions of what we think other people know, and we don't know what they know. And if we assume that they're going to behave the way we do and react the way we do, we don't. I was shocked to learn in recent months that the younger generation, when they answer a phone, don't think that they should say anything. It's the job of the person that called to speak first. And I can tell you, if I hired them to be my receptionist or to answer my phones in my office, that is not my expectation. Don't think that everyone knows. If you think you told them, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. You probably didn't. If you did, you'll probably need to do it again. Putting things in writing is the way to get things done consistently and to be fair to whoever you're communicating with and communicating back. An approach needs to be fully deployed, and that's going to be our next topic. Ideally, an approach should contain the definition of what is success or failure. Nicole's going to handle that next week. And it really needs to be fully integrated into the work system or the household system or the family system. Again, I'm going to push that off to next week for Nicole Solomon. Got a couple of quotes. Now I'm going to share a couple of quotes because I think these are good quotes. A complex system that works invariably evolved from a simple system that worked. I spent some time in IT, and this is a fundamental IT concept. It's called Gall's Law, from John Gall when he wrote the book in the 80s called Systematics. A complex system that works evolves from a simple system that works. And if you're just developing a new approach, start simple, build up. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. That's from Atomic Habits. Great book, very popular right now. I strongly recommend it. I like you to really embrace that second part of that sentence. You fall to the level of your systems. If you have your approaches laid out for your business or for your family or for your household or for your dormitory, wherever you are, and you have them documented and you do them systematically, you're going to do them when you're having a bad day, which means that when you're having a bad day, you're going to perform at a high level as long as you have documented approaches at a high level. And then on a good day, you're going to rise to the level of your goals. And I'm not going to read the other two. I just had to throw one up there for Demings because, well, I'm old and Demings kind of started this whole movement. Let's talk about deployment. An approach is great. If you're the only one that does that approach, it's a habit. The deployment is how you make sure that good ideas and plans are used by everyone. Let me go back to my example with me and Jay running the budget for a very large department. Jay and I, we did a great job for a couple of years. We sat down and we changed our dialogue to approach deployment, learning, and integration. Once we got the approach laid out, and he and I both agreed that this is the approach for this task to be done, rather than the push-pull we had going on before, it had to be deployed. I mean, it was a large budget. I didn't personally do most of the work to get it prepared. I depended on Jay and his team. He didn't personally do most of the work to get that done. The approach that we agreed upon had to be deployed to his team. His team worked with department directors and division managers. It had to be shared with them. We submitted the budget through a whole chain of processes at City Hall. We had to deploy and share it with them. Deployment means sharing the approach with everyone that does it for sure, and everyone that touches it on either end for sure, and then everyone that might need to know about it. Fully deployed would mean sharing with everyone, but deployment is how you share things out. It means putting your methods in action. In the restaurant example, if you have 4 hostesses and you ask them to come up with a good approach and they sit down and they come up with a great approach and they say, we're going to greet the guest in this many minutes when they walk in the door. We're going to smile. We're going to say these words, and they all agree to it. And manager reads it and says, you guys did a great job. Put that in action. And of your 4 hosts or hostesses, only one of them really kind of does it. They all agreed it was great, but one of them does it. So that means that 1 out of 4 times a customer walks in your door, they're getting that great greeting and handling. And the rest of the time, it is just random, whatever the mood the person greeted them is. That's not success. Deployment means making sure that every person that needs to follow an approach understands how to and does it. In a restaurant example, it's how the front of the house teams uses the same rules for customer service. It's making sure that the guests are handled the same way for proceeding and payments and guests every time, every shift as appropriate. I'm going to throw the as appropriate in there because when you're deploying an approach, sometimes you would vary the approach based on circumstances. For instance, in the restaurant industry, how you treat a lunch guest who wants to get in there, get their food and get out versus how you treat a dinner guest who wants to get in there and linger over their food and have their dessert. Those are two different experiences, and you adjust your approaches for those two different chefs. Same thing in the back of the house. If you have three different chefs on three different shifts and they use three different recipes or three different variations of a recipe, no consistency in your food, no consistency in your guest experience, no consistency in your business. Uh, it's how you make sure that everyone in the back of the house knows the routine, does the routine every time, every day. It's getting the whole kitchen team, back of the house team on the same page. Make sure it's going to be done the same way, the right way, no matter who's cooking, no matter who's doing the dishes. Deployment is everyone using the same approach. It's everyone greets guests the same way. It's everyone takes orders the same way. Deployment gets shared horizontally and it gets shared vertically. It gets shared across the board and up and down. So the wait staff should know how to greet the guest. The kitchen should know how the wait staff greeted the guest. The wait staff should know how the kitchen's going to execute the order. So across the board, that whole experience horizontally, everyone should know what's coming in and going out so that everything can be coordinated. It goes vertically. When I walk in the door and the first restaurant employee that greets me, it doesn't matter if it's the busboy or the owner, the greeting should be the same way and it should be consistent. It should follow the same approach. And approaches should be shared often externally. If I want to do a special and my food vendor knows I'm planning to do that special on Fridays, that food vendor may be able to get me fresher, better, or cheaper goods to support that special. If I'm going to do a special event that's going to draw a large crowd and I share that with my neighboring businesses, they might say, hey, you can use my parking for the overflow parking. Approaches are basically the plans of a plan, do, check, act. And approach is how you do something. Deployment is how you share it. And you should sometimes share that with your vendors, your customers, your collaborators, and your partners. More quotes. A vision without execution is just hallucination. I don't know if Thomas Jefferson actually said that or not, but it's commonly attributed to him. But an approach without deployment is a pipe dream. Success is the sum of small efforts repeated day in and day out, and I truly believe this. I believe a lot of systematic little approaches done day in, day out, consistently make a system, and the right system makes success, and success makes money, and I like money. Excellence is not an act, it's a habit. And then to lead into a topic coming up in the future, no matter how beautiful your strategy, you should occasionally look at results. And not next week when we talk about learning and integration, but the following week, we're going to talk about how to look at results. From the Sterling perspective, I'm going to share some of our approaches. One of our approaches is when one of the summer learning series sessions is completed, we're going to post the video. We're going to post the PowerPoint. So if my head was in the way for a little bit, you can go get the PowerPoint for yourself. And we're going to post the discussion notes we have for Laura's recap and our Q&A after the meeting. For deploying it, well, I'm deploying it right now. Deploying it right here. I'm letting everyone know, because not everyone's been on all the planning calls for this, that's what we're planning to do. Another approach is to encourage presenters and attendees to share with your coworkers about the summer learning series. So I'm encouraging you right now, if you get anything out of this session or last week's session, please share it with your friends and coworkers. My new boss is on here, so I'm going to see what she thinks about it pretty shortly, I think. And as far as deployment, come back next week and see how it worked out. Basically, defining the processes, writing things down, having a consistent approach. I don't care if the question is how do you care for your pet? How do you get your homework done? How do you run a multi-million-dollar corporation? Having the document, plan out the approach mentality is truly a game changer. Try it for a while. You'll see what I mean. You have to share it. You have to train it, and you have to reinforce it. An approach that's in your head and is great does nothing. An approach that everyone that needs to use it uses consistently does great. You'll need to monitor deployment for consistency because not everyone starts following new steps at the same time. So you need to monitor, make sure that everyone's using the same approach. And you'll learn why when Nicole starts talking about learning next week. And that'll lead to adjusting the deployment if your outcomes are varying. Those last two really are part of learning. Nicole Solomon, who's going to be speaking next week, I'm going to expand on learning and integration. But at this point in time, here's my question for you. And then Laura's going to recap and prompt your questions for us. So where do you see gaps between approach and deployment on your team or in your habits, your household, or your business?
Fantastic, Gordon. Thank you so much for taking us through approach and deployment. That was a lot to capture. So let me recap and you can tell me what I've missed or where we need clarifications. Adley and Letzi, you opened up, can be summarized in 7 words. Approach, deployment, learning, integration, levels, trends, and comparisons. And I really appreciate the fact that you called this out because this learning series is actually structured around those 7 words, of which you covered the first 2. So we have 5 left. Learning, integration, levels, trends, comparisons. And then of course, we'll cover scoring and open up a QA session for recap at the very tail end. From an approach perspective, this is what I captured. Approach defines the problems the organization has decided to solve. It's defining what the organization has decided to focus on. Approach sets a focus on strategic objectives, goals, and methods for achieving them. Approach is a plan with process steps that define what a group of people in the organization do and how they do it. Approach characterizes the way that the organization and the team have decided to organize their work. For your restaurant example, I captured the fact that approach would include the methods for what and how the chefs prep and cook the food, how the servers serve the food in order to support the brand of the restaurant. I captured process consistency to ensure high quality consistency of service, product, and experience for each and every patron. And approach must be documented, fully deployed, include a definition of success and failure, which I think is really important. You need to know whether your approach is successful or failing so that you can recover and make improvements. And then lastly, approach must be fully integrated into the work systems that are used by the organization. I think when we got into the deployment, you called out a point that I didn't capture, but I'd like to emphasize right now, that in defining your approaches don't stand on their own. Multiple approaches used within an organization are integrated with each other for the success of each approach. And that, I think, is another tidbit or consideration, a technique for deployment. So for deployment, I captured deployment requires putting approach in place across the organization and not just within one team or one area. It means everyone is aware of the existing approaches and they are able to take action to support the approaches when needed. Deployment, and I love this, I'm glad you said it, deployment is consistency in action. For the restaurant example, deployment would be visible in the consistency of the recipes, the quality of the food, regardless of the resources creating it, the time of day or the day of the week, consistency of cleaning. It would also be visible in the consistency of cleaning throughout the restaurant, whether it be in the dining area, the kitchen, the restrooms, the offices, wherever, the lobby, the waiting area. Consistency is also in the ease of making a reservation, whether it be on the phone, online, or through some other contact method like OpenTable. Deployment in summarization can be defined as everyone using the same approach, aligning approaches horizontally with other staff members, aligning approaches vertically from senior leadership all the way down through all the areas of the organization, and then aligning approaches externally with partner suppliers and contractors. So now I would like to open it up for comments or questions that could be put in through chat. However, I do have a question for you. Gordon, if you don't mind, when you were talking, I was starting to think through, in this day and age of digitization and AI and immediate, use of knowledge. Do you have any recommendations for documenting approaches that you could offer to our listeners and learners here?
Well, that's fun. The question is absolutely yes and absolutely not. You need to document approaches in a way that is appropriate for who you're documenting it for. For example, I used to work with a bunch of engineers and I used to work in IT, and documenting approaches in the flow chart really communicated those and got them followed. I also work with a lot of HR departments and they write policies and procedures. Documenting those approaches in paragraphs with bullets and indents worked perfectly fine with them and it resonated with them and it made sense. So you need to document them as appropriate for the circumstance and the audience. An example I use a lot when I'm talking about approaches and the reason to document is I have a cat. It's just my wife and I and a cat. The cat has diabetes, so there's all sorts of things that we do to make sure he gets his shots on time, that his litter box gets cleaned, et cetera, et cetera. We know what to do. We have the rhythm. Do we need to document that? Yes, because we like to take vacations and we need to have a pet sitter sometimes. And we need to have the medications and the schedule and the rhythm. So pretty much an approach is it's got to be documented based on who you're going to be deploying it to. And that does vary for every organization, every industry, every family, and every culture.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Audience is key. You always need to know your audience. And I'm a firm believer in one pagers and diagrams. Sometimes less is more. It gets people to understand very quickly what the key requirements are. So thank you for that. What methods would you take to ensure your approach is appropriately deployed?
Observation, Gemba walks, for those of you that are in Six Sigma, and measurement. If you're going to do something, you need to build in, doesn't have to be constant, but at least a spot check built in. So every week I'm going to spot check and see how my hostess is greeting people. You need to build in feedback mechanisms. A critical approach, maybe you measure everything and get immediate feedback. Routine things, you just do a scheduled spot check, or random spot checks. And you roll the dice and say, I'm going to check on approach number 2 today. They do need to be followed up on, but you need to prioritize what you follow up on and how often.
Right. Good one. And then just to close us out, I have 2 more questions. How do you know when you have an approach issue? And then the second question is the same, but slightly different. How do you know when you have a deployment issue? In other words, an opportunity for improvement. For approach, opportunity improvement for deployment. What would you look at to identify opportunities in both areas?
Well, that is fun. Basically, and I said as part of my presentation, you need to have a definition of success built into your approach. Um, Before you can measure where a system is broken down, you have to have the system. So if not everyone is following the same approach and something breaks down, you don't know whether it's because someone didn't follow it or because the approach was bad. Once everyone is doing the same approach consistently and it's not producing results, then the answer is clearly to adjust the approach. So really do the approach, stick with the approach for a while with full deployment, and something breaking down from then, you know it's the approach. Until you get full deployment, you're going to have inconsistencies with the deployment, and that's where you'll be correcting some things. Someone didn't understand the instructions or is not following the instructions.
Right. So we just had a question put in chat. Is this the same as a SWOT analysis?
It is a part of a SWOT analysis. I mean, essentially, a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, are two things that reflect how you're doing internally, and that's your strengths and your weaknesses. And opportunities and threats are external things that affect your organization or your family. Um, if you have your approaches documented and fully deployed internally, that's going to be part of your strengths. If you don't, or they're not fully deployed, that's going to be part of your weaknesses. So yeah, an approach Adley is relates to a SWOT analysis, but it's the strengths and weaknesses part. Opportunities and threats of a SWOT analysis, really you get those from an environmental scan. So those kind of different. But yeah, it definitely does address those. And deployment of an approach or learning from an approach or an approach not being integrated fully into a system is often where you find some weaknesses.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Gordon. We are at 12:30, right on time. I really appreciate everyone joining us today. Gordon, you've been fantastic. Love the deep dive through approach and deployment. You kept me typing.